Your Excellency, Monsignor Youssef, Maronite Archbishop of Cyprus, distinguished Professor Kostas Guliamos, Rector of the European University Cyprus, distinguished representatives of the American, Greek, and Lebanese embassies, distinguished Professor Gabriel Kalakuti, President of the Association of the Maronite Cypriot Graduates, the representative of the Ministry of Education to Cyprus, thank you very much for your presence and for your intervention. Ladies and gentlemen, I am profoundly grateful to Archbishop Sueif, Professor Guliamos, and co-workers, as well as to the Embassy of Lebanon in Cyprus and the Association of the Maronite Cypriot Graduates for having framed this conference on Cypriot soil within the premises of the distinguished European University Cyprus, to honor the birth centennial of the Lebanese philosopher Kamal Youssef Hage. Although the date of this event is falling almost 1 month after the concluding date of the Jubilee year that has commemorated the centennial, the organizers have decided to incorporate this treasured initiative within the official list of festivities, paying tribute to Hage's birth centennial and to publish the conference proceedings in the official centennial book, in which all addresses and papers offered on the occasion of the centennial will be gathered. The topic of my address is to reflect upon the centrality of Kamal Hage philosophical concept of Chrislamity in shaping Lebanon's civilizational message and building a truth-loving peace for Cyprus. Kamal Youssef Hage is a Lebanese philosopher who was an authority in modern Arab thought, having left a lasting impact in contemporary philosophy. By name, every so often, the philosopher of the Arabic language, the philosopher of Lebanese nationhood, the philosopher of Chrislamity, the philosopher of the National Pact, the champion of Lebanese philosophy, or in short, the philosopher of Lebanon, this towering figure has bequeathed a wealth of original philosophical works as well as philosophical fidei writings. Among the 4 innovative theories within his philosophy, the concept of Chrislamity holds a particularly prominent rank. The word Chrislamity is our rendering in English of the Arabic original an-Naslaniyya, a neologism Hage coined by contracting the 2 Arabic equivalents of Christianity and Islam. Through this forged concept, he meant to convey, according to an early definition penned in 1966, and I quote, a civilizational parity in the innermost mutual perception between Muslims and Christians in the Arab East, end of quote. Chrislamity is thus originally a visionary and optimistic civilizational concept that aims at conceptualizing, consolidating, refining, and updating the lasting fraternity that has existed between Christianity and Islam within Lebanon across the ages, and at extending its application to a larger region of the globe, the Arab East. It is definitely not, as one might mistakenly construe, an amalgamation of 2 different forms of belief in order to institute some art of religious syncretism. Far from that. Hage is the first philosopher to have proposed the concept of Chrislamity as an encapsulation of the spirit permeating the Lebanese National Pact and embodying Lebanon's historical message, so much praised later on by St. John Paul II in many apostolic documents. In his 10 manifestos, released in 1975, Kamal Hage had proclaimed, and I quote, "The Lebanon of tomorrow is more than Lebanese. The Lebanon of tomorrow is missioned." This is what Lebanese philosophy says, and its missionhood is aimed at the Lebanese from inside and at the Arabs from outside and at all peoples. End of quote. In the late 80s, this prophetic statement reverberated in the famous saying on Lebanon by the late Pope St. John Paul II, one of the greatest spiritual masters of modern history. Reflecting on the desperate situation of Lebanon back then, St. John Paul addressed the whole world with supernal wisdom, proclaiming, and I quote, "Lebanon is something more than a country. It is a message of freedom and a paragon of pluralism to East and West alike." End of quote. Accordingly, the Pope warned that, and I quote, "the disappearance of Lebanon would, without any doubt, turn into one of the greatest remorses of the world. Its protection is one of the most urgent and most noble tasks that the contemporary world should take upon itself." End of quote. For El-Hajj, this universal message is the very essence of Lebanese nationhood, another emblem of his philosophy. He writes, I quote, "No nationhood is detached from a religious interpretation of the universe. And so I coined the word Naslaniyya, which means Islamity, to establish that Lebanese nationhood is a civilizational marriage between Christianity and Islam. Lebanon is neither Christian nor Muslim. It is rather the harmony between both. Here lies the greatness of Lebanese nationhood." End of quote. Later on, he will expand on this idea by writing, and I quote, "Lebanon is more than an organizational consensus that regards quantity. It is a civilizational consensus that regards quality. It is the blending of two gigantic doctrines. Thus, we are facing a process that is breaking new. We are facing a Islamic worldview. Indeed, the two doctrines that twitch Lebanon are of such momentous gravity that no quantitative even-handedness can be established between them, since one is illustrating an easterly civilization and the other a westerly one. Two dissimilar doctrines, yet each hitting the mark. Thus, the need for generating a third doctrine, as formidable as both, that puts together the treasures of both in dissimilar similitude. This third doctrine stems from both to get back to both. So it is not an exotic doctrine. And so Lebanon came into being. We thus say, El-Hajj continues, that our independence was not purely organizational. It was much more profuse than that. Our independence came into being on the basis of a doctrine that apprehended it as a civilizational message built on Christianity. And without the latter, there is no rational raison d'être anymore for Lebanon. Civilization first and foremost. Organization comes second. And the civilization here is one that believes in God. It is a religious civilization that vests Christianity and Islam with a positive and constructive meaning, thanks to the benevolent sharing of physical life between the children of both religions. How else can Lebanon serve West and East substantially at the civilizational level? Lebanon is minor in size, but nations are not gauged by their geographical sizes. They are of civilizational quality, and civilizations stem from doctrines, and a doctrine is a philosophical worldview. Lebanon has been graced living in isolation from the vast Arab environment that represents its vital area with regard to all its social endeavors, it would be incapable of playing a gatherer role between a Christian civilization and an Islamic civilization. And were Lebanon to dissolve in the Arab East de facto and de jure, that is politically, losing its specific traits of representing Arabic Christianity as well as Arabic Islam, it would fail to play a gatherer role between these two big doctrines. The greatness of Lebanon stems from the fact that it is a brotherly, real-life encounter between two big historical traditions as regards civilization, not just as regards organization. And of course, these works are the philosophical bedrock of Lebanon's famous national pacts. As I said before, Kamal Hage was often depicted in his lifetime as the philosopher of the national pact. In fact, his groundbreaking book entitled Constructive Confessionhood, or the Philosophy of the National Pact, and released in 1961, was personally and directly supported by the late Bshara Khalid al-Khouri, first president of the independent Lebanon and one of the main framers and pillars of the National Pact. About the National Pact as the heart of Lebanon's message, El-Hajj had this to say, and I quote, "Confessionhood, as we have it, is the rightful continuance of a eschatological consensus between the two wings of Lebanon. So it is much more than administrative appeasement. It is a brotherly fusion of two great religions in one nationhood. Nay, it is the point where East and West join, and our national pact has been the expression of this civilizational blending. Some of us have misunderstood the pact when they viewed it as an administrative accommodation in the cards of the government. But our pact has ostensibly surpassed administrative parity within the government towards a civilizational parity in the innermost mutual perception between Muslims and Christians in the Arab East. It was explicitly concerned with safeguarding the Christians in the Arab East. Thanks to this pact, Christians today can enjoy freedom of conscience. This could not have been possible if the Arab Christians did not enjoy autonomy within a free political entity headed by a Christian. There are in the Arab East approximately 7 million Christians back then. And I presume that nobody ignores the latitude of this Christian force for eradicating Zionism. This being the case, it was imperative to find a national formula that embraces Christianity and Islam. This formula is Lebanese nationhood. And this rich text exemplifies two fundamental facets of the National Pact and by the same token of Christianity. The first is the necessary existence of a politically free Arab Christianity in the Arab East in order to inaugurate the authentic civilizational Islamic message based on the religious love and harmony. The second is the inevitable collision of the National Pact and by the same token Christianity with Zionism, which is an antagonistic doctrine running counter to Christianity and Islam alike because it negates Jesus as the prophesied Messiah through an antagonistic religious political agenda that squarely puts in jeopardy the political existence of Lebanon and as well as its civilizational universal message. The declaration of St. John Paul II on Lebanon, the message cited above, has shed new light on the second facet of Christianity. Indeed, the key words in the Pope's proclamation are, if you remember, freedom and pluralism. Yeah? Lebanon is a message of freedom and a paragon of pluralism. Also, the fact that he proposes Lebanon as a model to both East and West is very revealing. It can, and in my opinion should, be read as hinting that Lebanon is a strong message of freedom to the East, and a telling example of pluralism to the West. Here, freedom ought to be understood as the recognition of all universal rights of the human person, and pluralism as the full respect of all fundamental rights of religious and cultural communities composing a specific society. Thus, the papal proclamation teaches in a nutshell that the field of human rights must be expanded in order to include, beside the rights of individuals, those of groups and communities, especially if they are minorities within their own society, together with the rights of peoples and nations. It also teaches that the present consensual Islamic model in Lebanon can inspire a new international order based on an equitable balance between particularity and universality. Indeed, in terms of respecting and observing all fundamental rights, personal as well as collective, Lebanese Christianity proved in many ways to be more generous than the present international instruments of rights. St. John Paul II, also he, addressing the UN General Assembly in 1995, had already warned the community, the international community, of its indifference in promoting collective rights. I quote from him, he said, "The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in 1948, spoke eloquently of the rights of persons, but no similar international agreement has yet adequately addressed the rights of nations. This situation must be carefully pondered, for it raises urgent questions about justice and freedom in the world today." End of quote. By the expression "rights of nations" in the quotation of St. John Paul II, he meant indeed communal rights, for he expressed in the same address that, and I quote, "rights of nations are nothing but human rights fostered at the specific level of community life." End of quote. Regarding the second facet, that is the struggle with Zionism, Hage would always consider Christianity as the adequate mystical doctrine with which Zionism, itself a mystical doctrine in his view, ought to be confronted. He had declared, and I quote, "The Arabs today need a mystical doctrine of the Palestinian cause so that the confrontation can unfold between two mystical doctrines. This is the kind of confrontation the adversary has imposed upon us, and we are being backed into this corner. The confrontation goes beyond politics. It is between two messiahs, the Messiah of Christianity and the Messiah of Zionism, and one rules the other out. This ought to be our starting point. It should be religious." End of quote. Time does not allow me to ponder at length the wealth of all other additional layers that Christianity conceals in the writings of Hage. Allow me, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, to turn to the next topic of my address: how the concept of Christianity can inspire the building of a truth-loving peace for Cyprus. In many ways, I see remarkable similarities between Cyprus and Lebanon. Both are age-old, pluralistic countries at the ethnic and confessional levels. Both are at the crossroads of East and West, and of Christianity and Islam. And both harbor a Maronite community, an eloquent witness of the secular and indefectible relationships between Cyprus and Lebanon. Cyprus versus many minorities, the most important of which is the Turkish Cypriot. Also, and unlike Lebanon, Cyprus is a member of the European Union since 2004. Cyprus as an independent state is still longing for lasting peace ever since 1983, when the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus was auto-proclaimed without recognition by any nation except Turkey. A lasting and truth-loving peace for Cyprus can only be established through a reunification of the divided island. Here,
Christianity can inspire many fundamental principles for building such a perennial peace. The first principle is that religious fraternity is the most essential element for solving the Cypriot conflict and reaching a sustainable social order. A corollary of this principle, almost as essential in the eyes of Christianity as the principle itself, is that this fraternity must be physically lived, that is profoundly experienced in real daily life and not just theoretically promoted. This requires an intimate proximity between Cypriot Christians and Muslims in everyday activities and precludes perforce a geographical and ghettoizing separation of the constitutive communities. The second principle is that true peace cannot be built on organizational agreements alone. It has, first and foremost, to be a civilizational message, whereby peace building would be based on four fundamental and exclusive pillars: truth, justice, love, and freedom. Peace somehow has to turn into a spiritual vocation for Cyprus, allowing this country to become, in the words of St. John Paul II, pronounced for Lebanon, and I quote, a light for the peoples of the region and a sign of peace that comes from God. End of quote. I deeply believe that Cyprus possesses the necessary religious, historical, and civilizational elements to forge its genuine identity along these lines. Let me dwell for a short while on the above-mentioned four pillars of authentic peace, that is, truth, freedom, justice, and love. The first pillar, truth, establishes that you cannot engage in constructive dialogue without being committed to truth. Good fellowship is not to be bought at the price of truth, after the manner of Lessing's parable of the three rings, if you know it, where it is said, I love him who does not have my faith, because after all, I am not sure that my faith is the true faith. No, such a love, as I believe, would amount to putting man before the source of truth, God. Whereas the true love, which is charity, goes first to God and then to all men. The more men are loved in God and for God, the more they are loved in themselves and for themselves. The second pillar, freedom, is intimately connected with truth. Freedom is first and foremost that of seeking and knowing the truth. Otherwise, it would degenerate into license. Only if freedom is established upon truth would it be in conformity with its genuine greatness, namely that of allowing man to determine autonomously the growth of his being as a person through choices consistent with the true good. In this sense, freedom is the best mirror of man's transcendent dignity. That is, that of being the only creature endowed with reason and free will and created in the image and likeness of God. The third pillar, justice, is based on the will to recognize the other as a person equal to me in dignity, and to build a social order which would ensure a reciprocal distribution of objective goods, whether material or spiritual, in an equitable manner. In its broadest sense, justice is respecting a healthy equilibrium among the multiple dimensions within the human person. It is best realized by the recognition and observance of the universal human rights and by the integral development of individuals, communities, and nations. Peace, as the prophet Isaiah says, is the fruit of justice. The fourth pillar, love, presupposes justice but transcends it. The human relationships cannot be governed solely by the measure of justice. if true and lasting peace is to be reached. No justice can, for instance, set us on the track of mutual forgiveness in order to heal the terrible wounds that we inflicted on each other by reciprocal violence in the past. Only love can. Thus, peace and good fellowship are also, and I would say are firstly, the fruit of love. In reality, peace as an act results only from love. Justice can merely do away with obstacles to peace, but it is love that enacts peace. A third vital principle that can be drawn from Hage's philosophical concept of Christianity in order to inspire a genuine peace for Cyprus is the necessity, the inescapable necessity of reconciliation with the collective memory. The necessity of reconciliation with the collective memory. This presupposes both the courage of self-criticism and the readiness for forgiveness. Genuine self-criticism and the request for forgiveness aim at what St. John Paul II calls the purification of memory. That is, the elimination from personal and collective conscience of all forms of resentment or violence left by the inheritance of the past. However, this purification process, besides being accomplished according to the objective criteria of historicity, paradigm change, and the principle of moral judgment, should also be accompanied by a continual call of the Holy Spirit for help in order for personal or collective conscience not to fall into unwarranted self-flagellation. In fact, purifying the memory is meant to liberate the conscience, not to recriminate it, and would allow for a new and pure start. It is a renewed obedience to the splendor of truth and to the respect for the dignity and rights of others. But above all, it is the kind of sharing in the mystery of Christ who took upon himself the sins of all. I know for sure that the collective memory of both Cyprus and Lebanon is heavily loaded with mutual hatreds, past offenses, and stereotyping, both at the interreligious and the intra-religious levels, let alone the ethnical level in the case of Cyprus. But here one may be guided by the admirable example of St. John Paul II, who, during the Jubilee year 2000, if you remember, asked divine forgiveness for centuries of sins committed by Christians, especially in the second millennium. This move, occurring at a solemn service of penance in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome on March 12, 2000, was an unprecedented plea in the history of the Catholic Church, as there were no precedents of requesting forgiveness for past wrongs by the pontifical magisterium. In this respect, allow me, dear and distinguished audience, to conclude my discourse on a personal note. Kamal Youssef, my father, faithful to his full-fledged philosophy of love, has never accepted to leave his endangered village when the most savage war was launched on Lebanon in the second quarter of the past century. He could have easily left his fellows and his region plunged into suffering, but decided instead to continue to serve and therefore to love, even though he was fully aware that he was not safe. He wanted to be a witness to love until the end of his life, and as a consequence, was brutally assassinated at the age of 59. How could one heal one's memory in this case? Inspired by his very teachings, we asked God for forgiveness for his murderers. That was imperative. But we also wanted to safeguard his martyrdom for the sake of perfect love as a telling sign for future generations. we thought it was our duty that Hage not only be rightfully acknowledged as a perennial philosopher, but also, and above all, recognized as a true martyr of the faith in Christ and the love for truth. And so, during the extraordinary jubilee in memory of the martyrs of Lebanon, which began on the feast day of St. Maron last year, and which ended up on the feast day of our first patriarch, St. John Maron, this year, we submit to the Maronite Church authorities an official request for the solemn recognition by the Church of Kamal Hage's martyrdom. Our plea, delivered to the bishop of his native parish on February 22, 2018, notes, among others, that our former Maronite patriarch, Mar Nasrallah Butrus Sayyid, may God grant him long life, was the first to greet explicitly, and I quote Patriarch Sayyid, the memory of the martyr Kamal Youssef al-Hage in an official patriarchal elegy back in 2006. I am immensely grateful to Archbishop Mar Youssef Swayed, my dear friend, guide, and spiritual father, and to so many other Maronite bishops for having encouraged us to submit this official request to the Church, and for having pledged to give it full support in the long process towards solemn recognition of his martyrdom and, who knows, towards a possible beatification or even canonization. Ladies and gentlemen, it was an exclusive honor for me to have addressed your distinguished audience within this eminent university. I wholeheartedly thank you for your attention and participation, wishing you all in advance a blessed Easter weekend.